How do you grow food and bring life back to a Mediterranean ecosystem where the rainfall is scarce, the summers are brutal, and the land is already tired? Well, that's what I came to Portugal to explore. Syntropic agroforestry in places like Brazil and the tropics have inspired a movement worldwide into regenerative growing. But in the drylands like Portugal, you can't just copy and paste these solutions from the tropics. And so what I've seen in Portugal doesn't just matter here in the Mediterranean of Europe, but also in places like California, Texas, parts of Australia, and even in New Zealand where I live and farm. So if you or somebody that you know is trying to grow in Mediterranean tough conditions, send this video to them. We're gonna look at some of the most advanced syntropic agroforestry in all of the Mediterranean. What you'll see in this video are large-scale production projects, backyard orchards and homestead-scale projects, research farms, and even native reforestation using syntropic principles. But first, we need to zoom out. For thousands of years, Portugal's landscapes evolved with people. From early foragers managing wild foods with fire, to the Neolithic farmers clearing those forests for crops. Roman estates and Moorish irrigation structures shaped these farming traditions. Things like stone terraces, the montado woodlands, and mixed orchards of figs, olives, grapes, and almonds. Over time, that balance shifted towards extraction. Tillage and cultivation intensified, there was a reduction in diversity and an increase in monocultures draining the land. Today, things like soil erosion, water insecurity, and rural collapse make the path towards regeneration a challenging one. But young farmers, land stewards, and local leaders are stepping up to the plate in a big way, and especially here in Portugal, which has become a hub for syntropic agroforestry in Europe. People learning how to reintegrate with these ancient practices, this ancient wisdom. And so that's what I'm doing here, to learn and share what's happening not just in Portugal, but across the Mediterranean. And if you want access to all the farm tours, the interviews, and the technical trainings that we're doing here in the Mediterranean as they're happening, come join the fellowship and accelerate your journey into food forestry. Site number one, this is Mark Leiber's site. It's a research farm, and he's one of the most well-known syntropic practitioners in Portugal. He spent lots of time with Ernst Goetsch in Brazil, and for the last 6 years has been planting his farm into a series of diverse food systems based on syntropic principles in the Mediterranean.
Right on the base of this little cypress.
Yeah, with the cypress underneath. And one of the alley crops has got garlic or leeks in here with poplar, and then blackberries. There's grapes in here. I don't know what this is. This is something that's dormant still. And then that's all in the alley crop in between two tree lines. The tree lines have apricot planted as rootstock, these eucalyptus being low pollarded, low pruned, the tree lucerne. It's cool. Some of the key takeaways from his farm. The first is that he's using cover crops as a huge part of his strategy for soil building and biomass, especially in the early days where a lot of it's just degraded soil conditions, not producing a lot of organic material. Adding that cover crop in pumps life into the soil, and it also has an abundance of organic material that can go in to feed the young systems. You can get multiple cuts per season. It's covering the soil, you're producing organic material. And the great thing about the use of cover crops is you're also preparing the site for future plantings. And so if you know that in a few years you're going to start to plant that area over there, put it into cover crops. Get that biology happening, that process activated. You can harvest organic material from there to feed to your young systems over here where you do start. So that's one of the key strategies that he's been using on his site that seems to be working really well. And one of the key things that Mark is doing is large-scale diverse tree planting and active management. And that last part's key, actively managing. He's planted about 3 hectares, I think, of a patchwork of different agroforestry systems, and he's actively managing them to do research. All right, this is a research farm. It's not intended at this stage for massive commercial production. It's learning, it's experimentation, it's seeing what species work well, how do you manage these, how do they interact together. He's creating a really invaluable resource and a library, especially for a Mediterranean context where there is not a lot of information. He's creating that library, he's creating that information and collecting that data to share with the rest of us. One thing that was really valuable that we saw on his farm is that he's mimicking the local ecology, the montado, right? These man-made savanna type ecosystems with cork oak and usually pigs or cattle or horses grazing underneath with scattered fruit trees. It's a montado ecosystem that historically has been managed And we see these wild spaces emerging, and the species that are emerging wild in these areas surrounding his farm, he's using those same species to inform what he's planting. And this is exactly what I talk about with the weedscape. Look at your local environment, what's around you, take information from that and use those in your agroforestry systems. Because that's the sign that that area is telling you, here's the template for how to build a forest. Really observe what the ecology is doing and what that's expressing and how he's applying that on his farm. Underneath all the oak trees, even if it's not got a bunch of other plants below it, the soil conditions are better, right? More organic material, the leaf litter, there's more shade on the soil, just better conditions. And you can even tell underneath these oaks we just went inside of, there's all these different species. It's a hotspot of biodiversity, and it's showing you the blueprint for how to reforest this landscape. So we just spent half an hour sitting underneath this 2,000-year-old olive tree. I was thinking about how many people have sat over those 2,000 years under this olive. It's very impressive. And it's also a really great illustration of the land of the dwarves, right? Land of the dwarves are these more Mediterranean climates where even the high strata olive is capping out at maybe 20 meters. This one's not even that. Whereas a high strata species in the humid tropics, right? More warmth, more rainfall, 60 meters, right? Avocados can get huge. And so you're thinking of land of the dwarves, land of the giants, helps you understand a little bit about strata and how you might delineate certain systems to the subtropics, temperate, Mediterranean. And in certain regions of Italy, they'll manage their olives so they have pruned the inside so it's open, more sunlight's coming through. You can cultivate citrus or pomegranates below them. You can see we've got some citrus down there. So the management of these systems is more or less the same, right? Keep things pruned, keep them open, keep them dynamic, and stack your species. Very cool. Obviously, Mark takes a lot of inspiration from what he learned with Ernst, and so he's doing ultra high density support species. Some of it was even blowing me away. With how densely you know that I plant things in my systems, he was taking some of this to another level, planting certain support species at half-meter intervals, which I might start doing myself because I can see the value, especially in these really hot, dry, low humidity areas at certain times of year. You want to create as much shelter as you can. We're going to get into the pruning style that he adopted to make that even more powerful, but it's just a really impressive amount of diversity and density. One of the really interesting systems that we did spend time in over the 5 days with Mark was an integrated vegetable system that used syntropic principles. And this was really interesting because he basically had a block filled with high density of eucalyptus and other support species at a fairly tight spacing, 1.5 meters. And what we did was we reset the system. We did our apical cuts on the eucalypts quite low, lower than I was imagining. And we used that opportunity of the disturbance in that area. We cut off the support species, we cut the cactus, we cut the eucalypts. And then in the alleys that were previously walkways, we sent a broad fork through them, and then we planted vegetables. We brought a bunch of organic material from the cover crop that were around the area. See another use for the cover crop. We brought all that organic material in and then planted vegetables. And those vegetables are going to be growing underneath the eucalyptus, underneath the support species, getting that extra humidity, getting that extra shade during the really dry, hot summers.
Tomato system, predominantly, Ukes will replace these posts in the trellis in a year, 2 years. We have this like low shrub set, 3-4 species in here. I'm curious how much Mark will ever let this grow up versus keeping it really low. Normally with veg systems, what we've learned in different places is there's no fruit trees in these rows. It's just support species.
Yeah, super cool. Vegetable, syntropic agroforestry, something a lot of people are very curious about. And this is how it can look.
I would say it's fairly common with veggies, like, or even in Syntropic, you think of like how many meters of grass to cover a meter tree row. 3 to 1, 6 to 1, depending on your soil. There's numbers out there. And so same perspective in grass with the veggies. And so it's fairly interesting to have a dedicated area where, hey, all we do is we grow our biomass for the veggies off to the side. It doesn't necessarily have to be right in the exact same space. It's pretty darn close for the like amazing output that are vegetables. These like high productivity species.
One of the key things at Mark's place was that it became very apparent that having access to the right equipment and machinery enables you to scale up very well. He lives in a certain situation where he has access to his neighboring farm's equipment, which makes things really easy to implement at a big scale. So part of the value is if you don't have your own equipment, talk to your neighbors, see what equipment is already in your area that you can hire, that you can borrow, or that you can acquire yourself and use for implementing. Because I know that as soon as I started getting more equipment, it allowed me to expand my capacity a lot. So that's one of the key things for subsoiling, particularly here where the soil is just really compacted. They had a digger on site to really help decompact the new installations especially. And so it just unlocks a whole new level of what you can get done when you do have access to equipment. So let's talk about the really low pollarding of the eucalyptus, because this is really interesting and I hadn't seen it before. Essentially what I typically do is I send my eucalypts way high up and I prune them at 5 meters or 6 meters because that's where I want the canopy to reform. I want to manage it there so I can have all my fruit trees below. But here, A, where things grow slower, and B, where you want to retain more humidity, more moisture, especially during the early years of those slower growing trees, you might want the canopy to be easier to manage. You want to have it lower to not have this massive gap between where the wind can come through and dry things out. If your eucalypts are up here and all your fruit trees are down below, you're gonna have a gap where the wind can come and dry things out. And so if you're trying to create a really well-moderated system, it might actually be more beneficial to pollard and to apically cut, right, the growing meristem. You cut the main growing tip of your eucalypt even lower to create A, a more sheltered and dense system, but B, that allows you to have more eucalypts in the system to increase the humidity, increase the cover. Because if you allow the eucalypts to get really big, they get wider, you have to start cutting more eucalypts out. So you have to thin the eucalypts out, removing some, as you let them get taller. So if you keep them small, you can actually have more of them at a higher density kept lower than if you send them all the way up. And so just really interesting things, playing with the management of them and seeing what's more appropriate in certain climate conditions. So it really opened my eyes to different ways of managing a species that I'm quite familiar with managing in a way that works for me, but to see it here in this site where it's hot, it's dry in summer, and you're trying to maximize how much humidity you can trap, how much shade you can create, this seems a really appropriate strategy for that. Scott, what were you saying about how great the community is?
I'm happy to give it a promo. I really like the community you put together in school because there's a ton of content that is put out and it always feels like you're there to support the people. I think it's the most interesting part, the most important part. It's like it feels like it's really dedicated to getting people into practice, which is what we're trying to do as teachers. Like if we can do that, then we've succeeded. So that's what I like about it. Keep it up.
Hell yeah, thanks, man.
Join, and I have an affiliate code. You can write me. I don't know what it is. I don't know how that works. We'll figure it out.
It's actually really simple, hey.
I'm sure it is. No, I believe you.
So one of the really interesting parts about this not being a commercial farm is that it's a research project. It's studying. Mark is learning, and he's also not doing this entirely out of pocket. He's getting funded, he's getting donations, which is a fantastic way if you have access to this. And my point here is that this exists, right? There's people who have money, there's companies and organizations that have money they want to spend on regenerative projects like this. And so part of it is kudos to Mark for getting this happening in this way, but also the opportunity is out there for you. If you become vocal about what you're doing, if you put it out there in a certain kind of way, there's people and organizations out there that want to help these kind of projects. And so if you don't have access to funds, think outside the box and see what organizations around you or might be connected to you that could help you with your project. And really the key takeaway is that he is a research farm. In my eyes, he's focused on rebuilding ecosystems with this particular practice of syntropic agroforestry in Portugal's Mediterranean conditions, not on commercial harvesting. That being said, there will be a day where that will come, no doubt. He's got 3 hectares planted, and so with that scale, inevitably you will be harvesting things, but at the moment, his focus is not that. His focus is on research, education, learning, and just managing these systems and figuring out how to do that in this context.
C'est assez surprenant pour moi de voir un artichaut si tôt dans l'année. Mais en fait, c'est peut-être probablement parce qu'il fait bien plus chaud au Portugal qu'en France. Voilà!
This is one of the most gorgeous areas. This is one of the newer systems. It's like 2 years old and it's got a huge diversity of species. We've got kind of two lines happening. The first line where all the main things are happening is right here, where we've got every 5 meters grafted fruit trees. Here we've got the almonds in this case, but in other lines there's apricots, plums, pears. In this one, almonds, and midway between the almonds, the grafted trees, is a mulberry. So that's every 5 meters grafted tree, every 2.5 meters from that mulberry, and then every meter in that same line is a poplar, right? Poplar, poplar, and next will be the almond. And then still in that line, we've got the madrona, we've got these, can't remember the name, it's conifer, it's the cypress, thank you very much. And then the second line that we have, which is part of what makes the system interesting, is the back line here of the eucalyptus and the tree lucerne. Every 2 meters, eucalypt, tree lucerne, eucalypt, tree lucerne. So these are some of the most beautiful systems, really dense, packed in well. A bit of grass pressure just because it is an extra kind of like double wide area, and so it's a lot harder to consolidate mulch. But speaking of consolidating mulch, all the mulch is being consolidated on the grafted fruit trees, and so it's not being spread across the whole space. Really all the mulch is being cut and fed to the grafted trees.
Nous avons donc une double ligne, un peu à la différence des terrains précédents. J'essaye de bien m'exprimer pour que ce soit télégraphique, pour la vidéo plutôt, pardon. Et nous avons plutôt la ligne Eucalyptus tagazacée en arrière-plan, peut-être pour le soleil, on ne sait pas. Et il y a beaucoup plus de fruitiers dans cette ligne. Alors ça en français c'est des arbousiers. Et ça c'est donc un amandier. Ça c'est un olivier. Et un cyprès. Voilà.
Yeah, that's like also those ones are plants that I propagate, the buddleias. Yeah, so I always propagate plants in these forestry pots. There's a growing demand for these plants within the community. Really useful for the agroforest, and it's super easy and fast to propagate. I had initially put them in pots like this size. They outgrew them, and now we transplanted them to those ones. Ernst, in front of everybody, like put me in this position. And I just kind of had to agree, I would say. I now also have to, of course, manage these different species, which in the other fields aren't really such a significant component yet. But here in this field, it now becomes really important also to structurally build up the olive trees and the strawberry trees and the wild pistachios. Because this pond doesn't have a spillway. Yeah. And so it just waterlogs the area.
Let's move on to the ketchup factory. This is a really interesting one. Probably one of the coolest agroforestry sites I've ever seen.
Different consortiums together, seeing what happens when they prune things in different ways, but it's a big enough scale that you get information back. One of the plots was like a hectare and the other was 2 hectares maybe, but they're repetitive enough, like these big long rows. It's very interesting. I loved it.
This is a project that many people here have said is probably the best demonstration of syntropic agroforestry in Europe, which is phenomenal. I'm so happy to have been able to be here, especially with Scott, my friend, who I was sick at the time that we visited, and so I was enjoying it. He was asking really great questions, but this project is so interesting in part because Ernst Goetsch has been consulting here for the last 5 or 6 years, and so they're implementing what he's talking about, what he's suggesting, and they're doing this at a large scale. They have about 2 hectares planted and actively managed, and it's beautiful, the simplicity and the elegance of the systems. So we're going to dive in and see what the key takeaways for me were from visiting here.
Response to the pruning.
In 3 months, how much of this canopy is closed?
On August, you will have a lot of shade.
Okay, which is perfect.
Which is perfect for this climate. So
okay.
Imagine now it's very good to have the sun entering and the temperature increasing. In August, we have some weeks we have 40-45 degrees Celsius. So
And really, this is production first food forestry. This isn't a backyard garden, this isn't a homestead. They're focused on production, efficiency of management, and function. And this is Paladin Hot Sauce, João, who we spent walking around with. He was an incredible and very knowledgeable host and farm manager. As soon as you arrive here, it's very clear that the mindset is production first. The agroforestry is supporting their commercial production. Now, the agroforestry isn't producing everything because obviously they've got a big factory that produces hot sauces and condiments that they source materials from all over the place. But the cool part is that the agroforestry system does contribute to that.
The hot peppers varieties we plant on the interrow. It's an annual, so our decision now will be 1 year more hot peppers, next year aromatic plants on the interrow. We always leave one without nothing, so we can manage everything.
Yeah. Having the on-site factory for value adding, I think, is a huge key. It's such a level up, it unlocks a whole new level of what you're able to do with your agroforestry systems when you have a way to add value to the products that you're producing. We actually got to take a tour of the factory where they're creating all these different recipes, they're testing things all the time, creating new iterations. It was really interesting, especially as somebody who eventually down the road will get into some kind of value-added products from the agroforestry systems that I'm creating. But I think the most interesting thing for me about this site was just the elegant simplicity in the layout and the management of these systems. They weren't overly complex, they weren't overly crazy, but you could still see the processes happening. What we like to think of as these crazy diverse systems where you have all these different strata mixed in together and you're actively managing, that's great, especially for a backyard, maybe even a homestead scale. But as soon as you start approaching commercial viability, it needs to become tight, elegant, simple. It's farming. And so you have to have it be as replicable as possible so people can be trained, and it's not this thing that requires all this super niche knowledge of how to prune this tree. And then when you're here at this tree, it has to be pruned differently. And this one, very simple, very straightforward. And you can see that with their system design. You can see that with how they're laying things out. The diversity is there, the management is there, the ecological process where they're actively building soil, they're having to rely less and less on irrigation. It's incredible. And it's systematizable. And that's what I'm really interested in. How do you systematize this process so you can scale it up?
Figure out a lot of the mechanization component and the tools to use. So they're using the electric secateurs, the electric scissors, which I haven't seen in action before, so that was kind of interesting. And then with a number of interesting tractor implements, so some BCS walk behind stuff, but then doing a lot of cover cropping. Like every other tree line, they do hot peppers, and that goes right into this factory they have where there's I think everything's organic that they source. Yeah, I was impressed. When I think about the project I want to start here, I felt a bit more aligned with what they had set up, in that they had clear production goals. Like there was the density of fruit or nut trees in the row was the same as conventional densities. And I think that is really important if you're trying to move this to a commercial level at all, but almost even on a homestead level, because you still need production. Otherwise you just end up, which is what we have seen a little bit, you end up just kind of managing support species versus spending more time on the production species. And that's an interesting balance conversation to have, but it felt like they had found that balance in a really nice way. I drew a lot of inspiration, got excited about some of the tractor implements.
One of the keys for them is the low strata. What they're finding is that one of the biggest costs in terms of labor hours is weeding the tree lines, which I don't know how necessary it is, especially in the later years, whether it's a purely aesthetic thing or whether it really is having an impact on the fruit trees. I don't know. But especially as a site where you're having people visit, it is nice to have clean, tidy tree lines. But what they're finding is that having these low strata species, especially in their case, the African bush daisy worked really well for them. Having a good density of those in your tree lines reduced weeding to almost zero. And that's what we're after. We're after not having to waste time weeding tree lines. We just want to be in and out with our pruning, our harvesting, and let the system, as much as it is possible, take care of itself. And so what they found is the low strata species in the understory below your fruit trees in the tree lines are more important to prevent weeding than your emergent trees. Your emergent trees, the poplar, the eucalyptus, the willow, those are there for biomass cycling and growth pulse. Low strata for reducing weeding.
where I have this lemon balm, and you see the corrections. We are putting more and putting other things. We will put other things. Here it's much easier than taking weeds out. It's just cutting, and you can have a business if you want to take something. Yeah, and you will see another ones. And I don't make. I will show you one line that we didn't make any weed suppression last year, because almost the line it's full of shrubs. Okay. Yeah, and you see here, for example, on this part and on those lines, we just cut it. It's much more easier. You don't have problems. It's always colder, the soil underneath. Yeah, when you reach this point, it's much easier. So now we are planting these guys and other guys everywhere. In my opinion, if you look at the work in Europe, the work of Felipe in Italy, for me that's the point. He always tells me, no, but you have the emergent layers. Yeah, but for me it's so much more important.
In this climate,
and
there's such great plants for it as well that don't get so out of control.
The key thing here that I found the most valuable was the simple and replicable management. It's repeatable, you can systematize it, you can train somebody on here's how you prune the eucalyptus and the poplar. And all of this management goes to support a few select species, not this crazy diversity. They've got plums, they have apples, they have pears. There's a handful of other species that they're focused on. And it becomes really easy when you can have a few key species to focus on versus when you have 12 or 18. If you're in your early years and you're wanting to do something commercial, by all means, experiment, see what works well at your site, but you will get to a stage where you want to refine things for more simplicity and ease of management and trainability. So you're not the only one who knows how to manage your system.
We already pruned the eucalyptus, and you see the soil, it's coming completely. It's very difficult to show people because they don't see the start point, the starting point.
What is the normal soil?
It was yellow and less than 1% of organic matter here, for example. And the soil, yeah, underneath these ones, it handles the water much more time, the humidity. Yeah, it's a shelter for insects, all those things.
Growing grapes on willows and poplar. That's super cool to see because I've heard a lot about that, haven't seen it in practice. And so the guys were there today pruning up the ladder.
Thank you. That's really, really important.
Where will you then bring these across on a wire, or just let them?
Just the trunk. Yeah.
Just the tree, no wire.
We could do just like this.
Yeah.
And you see, the pruning was here. We just left this and this for grape production.
Yeah.
And for example, for this one, we are just making this. The difference, go put here your hand and then put here.
The temperature.
And just,
It's crazy the difference. I love it.
Oh, wow.
And this is
apple trees.
This is the apple.
Yes, apple trees. So Paulo is the fastest guy we have. So you see the spinning with the pruning and with the electric scissor,
We don't have those in Costa Rica.
Let's move to the third site, which is actually a friend of mine that I met 2 years ago, and then we've revisited his site last year in Brazil. This is John from the northeast of Brazil. He's now in Portugal working on this incredible project where they've planted 2 hectares, but they've got the scope for over 100 hectares in the coming years, and so they're doing some incredible stuff. Let's dive in.
Yeah, the point is to be productive, to be self-sustainable financially, but also to do a lab where we can really play around with the temperate climate and see what we can, all the data we can put together.
There's not a huge local market right here. We're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, no, very small population, aging population. That is challenging. It's good because it makes us kind of address that right from the start. Very different from Triba. When we started at Triba, we had no experience and we were on our own. This time we've got an amazing team of people here with us. There are 6 of us. We've already got people, woofers have been coming to help already, which in Brazil we didn't have any. So, rather than doing it on your own, we're doing now, we started with 9 people. and everyone with their own speciality, as you know, some of them as well, like Antonio's incredibly capable, very well known in Brazil for his work, so it's great to have him here. People on bioconstruction, because we don't have accommodation, there's no accommodation here, that's the other big challenging factor. We could have a much larger team, but there's nowhere to put them, nowhere to live.
Coming to Portugal and it being a new climate type for them, learning new species, having to figure out plant access to certain species, certain volumes, different soil conditions, no irrigation on the site, not having organic material, having difficulties with building and getting access to the site to stay there. There's all kinds of challenges they're facing, and yet in spite of all of that, they're still managing to plant some really diverse, incredible looking agroforestry just in this first season alone, in a really tough environment.
But we have got a lot of species. I think we're working with 20, 25, something like that. And again, the same as the fruit trees, all of them have been marked, have all been marked in GPS. Everything's marked, all the species are marked, the nursery they came from, when they were planted, how they were planted, the correction of the soil, we have the soil samples from before, so all of that information, that's great, because we didn't have anything like that in Brazil. You know, we didn't have the opportunity.
And so these guys have gone crazy this first season. They've done the full 2-hectare planting while adapting to a more cold, and this is a continental climate. In the north of Portugal, it's a little bit more mountainous, a little bit chillier than the south and the coastlines. And so they're working with things like pears, apples, and again, their challenges are sourcing certain plants, getting water onto the site, having biomass. They don't have any established big trees on the site, and even the local municipality that does have access to wood chips, they can't deliver to them. And the cover crops that they're trying to establish, they're growing, but they're struggling because there's no irrigation. And so this is really a test of what is possible, not only in a tough climate, in tough conditions, but also having limited access to resources.
I believe that's catalpa. It's very difficult to know each one without the leaves on them. But mainly we've got birch, ash, poplar, catalpa, cedar, eucalyptus, mulberry, a lot of olive, because this is a big olive area, so we've got cuttings of mulberry everywhere. They grow really well here. We've got cuttings of fig everywhere, walnut, and then we've got 3 peaches and then walnut. So we've got a support species, again, because it's very dry and very hot in the summer. We're trying to shade out as much as we can to keep the moisture in the ground. So we've got the emergent line, then we've got the support line, which as you can see is just packed full as well. We've got a lot more stuff coming in. And then a lot of the same species. And then the high strata, so it's we have almond, we have apple, we have kaki in English. Persimmon? Is it persimmon?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got kaki, we've got quince instead of the peach. So the high strata, this one is going to be, yeah, this is kaki, Diospirus. And then again, same thing. So we've got Pistacia lentiscus, we've got Sobreiro, so cork oak. That's a big region of cork as well. So we've got a lot of cork oak, cactus everywhere, more mulberry, a lot of strawberry tree. We're really bidding heavily on the strawberry tree. I think that's really good here. We know it grows really well.
One of the key strategies that they are using to tackle these problems and address them are they're leveraging nearby projects. They went to go visit Mark's place. They're visiting other agroforestry systems to get that extra knowledge and access to materials. And so that's one of the key things, that if you're just getting started, connect with other projects around you. Or if you're already an established project in your area, you're a hub for other people to get started. And so no matter where you're at in the stage, leveraging community and other people in your area wanting to do this, or who already are, whether it's agroforestry or they just have a permaculture design system, it's of value to go visit them. Hey, real quick, on that note of connecting with other practitioners, we've got a 2,500 person free community, the Food Forest family, on the same school platform as the fellowship, but we have a map feature, so you can actually see who's in your local area as a practitioner doing this work, connect with people all around the world in your local area. This is a great tool to do it. It's free, Food Forest family, link is right there. Let's keep moving.
So we have got a lot of focus on in the early years, the experience we have with doing essential oils in Brazil. So we want to bring that over here, do essential oils. So stages as well, of course, the succession. We're looking at, for example, apples and kaki, or persimmon, quince, but we're also looking at olives, we're looking at juniper, which are hundreds of years down the line, because they grow so well here, they're native from here. So the idea is that eventually the succession will take us into that. The fruits that we're using to get there, so all the quince, all the apples, the pears, the plums, nashi, we're using specific varieties which are good for either dehydration, lyophilization, I think it's called in English, lyophilization, so freeze drying. So dehydration, freeze drying, and juicing. So those are the three. We're not betting that heavily on fresh fruit, although we are having some. Of course, we're going to have some here, so the team can have fresh fruit as well in the family. But yeah, that's mainly processing to increase the shelf life. Of course, nuts. We've got lots of nuts. We've got walnuts. We've got chestnuts. We've got almonds, we've got hazelnuts, we've got pistachio, nuts and dehydrated fruit, pretty much. Yes, blackberry, raspberry, gooseberry, mulberry, lots of berries, blueberry.
One of the extra challenges here is that there's a community tension. People in this local community, more traditional, and they really don't like certain species like eucalyptus and acacia. Right? They have these negative impressions, negative thoughts about these species, and so when it comes to using these trees, there's a challenge internally about, do we use them because the community hates them, but do we risk the project not being as successful if we don't use them? Or do we say, who cares about what the community thinks about these trees? We'll use them and showcase that these can work really well for a function in this system to help regenerate land and grow food in a low inputs kind of way. And then use that to help transform the narrative around these trees. And so that's a community dynamic that they're managing, but you might also have to manage. I'm certainly managing that in New Zealand, doing my best to break the stereotypes about acacia and eucalyptus being terrible species, and actually how they can be super powerful in aiding the restoration of a landscape into a productive space. So that's one of the challenges they're working with. And another one is that, I know it sounds like it's all challenges, they're doing great though. But one of the other challenges is that funding is available for new farmers. However, there's a stipulation that funding is only available if you plant in a traditional or a monoculture format. And so they actually planted a whole agroforestry system with some funding, and it ended up having to get ripped out. They had to rip out all the extra diversity and consolidate it into that 2-hectare plot. Because like I said before, they've planted over the 2 hectares. They have 100 and some odd hectares to play with, but they had to rip some out because it was funded with the monoculture funding, and that wasn't going to fly. And so they had to remove plants to put them into the 2-hectare trial block where it doesn't get funding because it's not a monoculture. And so part of that is, how do you figure that transition out of, okay, maybe we plant 80% of it in monoculture to start, 20%, and this is maybe only going to apply to a handful of you who do have access to that kind of funding or programs, but it's how do you aid that transition, getting funding on an annual basis for having these monocultures, but slowly transitioning towards a more diverse model, a more resilient model. There's plenty of ways to do it. It's interesting to hear what the stipulations and what these challenges are that they're facing, but it was an absolute pleasure to go visit John in the north of Portugal. I'm used to seeing him in Brazil, so it was really cool to see him in a cold climate working with these continental species. Speaking of challenges, this next site is absolutely fascinating. This was a tour that I had with Antonio with Terra Syntropica. So this is what it was before,
yeah,
no trees.
Yeah, no trees at all, as you can see.
And this is from the sky.
Yeah, this is the drawing that we made, and this is the earthwork that we've done.
Yeah, wow. Basically, this is a multifaceted regenerative project that combines a CSA, the farm, they have a restaurant, they have school programs for kids, and they have native regeneration projects. And so they're doing some incredible work here at Terra Syntropica.
We are in a semi-arid region. We have like in between 300 to 400 millimeters of rain per year. This year we had like 600 so far, which it was amazing, but also created constrangement regarding the food production. Everything was underwater.
Wow.
The water this year jumped from the water course, and it was like here. So
Just flooded everything.
yeah. And this color, it's from the work that we've been doing since 2019 here. This is more or less the color of the original soil. And this is the soil that we've been added from chop and drop, and obviously a lot of wood chip.
The tree lines with the vegetables in the lowlands where they do have access to some water, and then on the slope they have this combination of nests with swales where they're planting these really drought tolerant species and still seeing success in these tough conditions. Really, it's impressive what they're doing. They have an incredible team where they're essentially pioneering watershed and landscape restoration. It's incredible to visit, see their operation. It's impressive how many different moving parts they had to what's happening there.
All the lands with no trees at all. You can see it's mostly rock. As you can see, you have a little bit of soil and the rest is rock. We did some earth movements, earthwork, just in order to create a structure. Mainly it's swales.
Members in the community are getting weekly boxes of vegetables and fruit. They've got these beautiful restoration projects using Syntropic efforts where they're actually comparing between conventional methods of native reforestation. So they've got trial blocks where another organization or team is using glyphosate, like some sprays. There's another test area where they're just girdling or ring barking trees and putting acorns in the ground to get the oaks to grow. And then at their site, they're doing a reset of the established invasive species, the strawberry tree, the acacia, the eucalyptus. They're resetting them, organizing the biomass, including other early succession species, and planting the acorns. And they're seeing a huge success rate in germination and establishment of these native species, not focused on food production, just on native vegetation.
And actually here you can see by the legend what they did. A is the control area, B it's the control of acacia with cutting. Here it's the C is the control area with herbicides, and the D is the control area with the skin off of the acacia. We made some soil samples, and the organic matter content there on the acacia was 4%. I can tell you that on the surroundings of Myrtilla, the organic matter content is around 0.1, 0.5, 0.8 maximum. There you had 4%. It's amazing. It's a huge, huge difference when you have trees and when you don't have it.
Through managing the existing invasive species, organizing the biomass, including some earlier succession species, and planting the natives, it's booming. Ecological process works whether you're on a farm or on a degraded landscape or in a landscape that's being repaired, I'll say that, by invasive species, in air quotes. It was also really cool to hear that 5 of the 6 schools in this area have gardens that they're regularly engaged with. This team, they're regularly going to schools, doing gardening things, maybe teaching about agroforestry. 5 out of the 6 schools. That should be happening in schools all across America, all across Europe, all across Australia, all across the world, where schools are teaching not just gardening, but agroforestry, food forestry practices to these kids, and getting them inspired and getting them excited about it. Love to see that. In the valley, they have a lot of flooding issues because the watershed isn't actually equipped to handle that amount of water coming down all at once. So they've even had to move some crop production into the greenhouses because of the floods. And then the extreme on the opposite side is the slopes are so dry and so cooked by the sun, lacking an organic material in the soil, lacking vegetation, but using these swales, planting, organizing the organic material is bringing these areas back to life in just a few short years, which is a beautiful process to see. And so it was very cool to see Terra Syntropica, meet Antonio and the team, and just see all the beautiful work they're doing. Zooming in on a really micro level, there's a really interesting project that isn't Syntropic agroforestry, but super interesting just to the richness and diversity that it had. A lot more tropicals here than we were at any of the previous sites, which were more inland. So, strawberry tree, weed, pineapple guava, and Fiji guava. Ooh, the cotton candy tree, or the state gingerbread tree. Found in Florida and Australia. Moringa, Buddhist and citrus, ice cream bean. Chocolate pudding for yes, last all day. Peanut butter tree, this consistency and taste like crazy. Jelly plum, these are ornamentally fucking amazing. Lipstick tree, ooh, these are, I don't know what they're called in Brazil, but in Brazil, a lot of these make nice red dye. Star fruit, dragon's eye, longan, dragon fruit. Meat for the poor, never heard of some. Interesting, kind of poor. Monstera fruit, finger lime, caviar lime, very nice. Elephant banana. Tomato tree, tamarindo, pepino, and the, what is this? Not person, Chinese winter date. Interesting, I don't know what this is. A jujube? There we go, diversity. This was a place in the very south of Portugal called the Orchard of Flavors, run by Miguel. Only started planting 4 years ago. It's a homestead scale experimental food forest that has over 500 edible species.
Fruit, nuts, a lot and more edible leaves, edible flowers as well, or even edible bark. We are now growing here successfully cinnamon. So it's a project about food trees and climate change. We are in fact exploring the range of perennial edible plants of warmer countries that could possibly grow well here. We are accredited as official botanical garden as well, so we can do research with universities. After a few years now, we are ready to do that.
And he's really focused on maximizing diversity to inspire other local growers, because a lot of local growers stick with the same 4 or 5 conventional crops. But here Miguel is showing that you can grow 500 different kinds of edible species. And he's also using the site to demonstrate to other non-locals, other foreigners who come here, a lot of people buying land, and they feel inspired to do something what Miguel has done. And so he helps them see how that can translate into their own land. How can we get this practice not just into the local farming community and local farming practices, but also into the other people who are coming from abroad, buying land, wanting to live a more regenerative life, or having just more fresh fruit year-round. Miguel has created a beautiful example of that.
But when we are talking about the Mediterranean climate, we are talking about a big part of Europe, including Turkey as well. We are talking about California, a big section of Australia, Argentina as well. So you see, it's quite a big area, and it's the main features of a Mediterranean climate. It is really hot and long summer and rainy, short, mild winter.
One of the really cool things about what happens here is when you have 500 plus edible species, it's an experimental orchard. Again, not Syntropic, but what it still does is it becomes a living nursery, a living inspiration source for people who are interested in this, and it activates them to see, oh, I should plant some fruit trees at my place. Or it becomes a propagation, a living nursery where he's got plants propagating. He's growing his own plants, because that's the nature of these things, whether it's from seeds, cuttings, tubers, rhizomes. Plants want to self-propagate. And so if you have a bunch of them, you can become that person in your community where people come, they gather. I know Miguel does courses, and I'm sure that people walk away with not just inspiration and ideas, but also plant material. And that models exactly how these forests rebuild themselves. It's not big patches at a time, but it's small. It's a patch by patch network. And so Miguel's patch is now seeding a bunch of other patches of forest, regenerating locally. It's a beautiful process to see. It's like you get fresh fruit year round, straight from your land. You get to create a cool environment for yourself, your family, your kids, your friends. You see these ecosystem processes come back. You invite the life back in. You attract other people who are also nerds and also interested in fruits and eating from the land, and just start to create this really cool community around you. And now there's this random New Zealand guy popping out from like nowhere in the middle of your South Portugal, a random place, and it's just like you attract people to your site. The number of people who I've attracted to my site from all around the world just because of what I'm doing there. It's not because of me, but just because of what you can do on your land, what you can do to create that ripple effect, create this positive upward spiral in your own life. I know, we're going there. Just by doing this work. Double down on doing this stuff. Nothing but good will come from it. Now, a couple interesting takeaways from what Miguel is doing. One, he's got this spiral irrigation system around a lot of his fruit trees, where instead of just a single drip line, he's actually created a spiral around on the ground for a deeper soak, a more comprehensive watering for the root systems, especially in such a dry climate. And another thing, that because he's not incorporating the use of support species, especially a heavy density of them like we do in Syntropic agroforestry, he is reliant on every single year bringing in inputs, bringing in compost, bringing in wood chips. And so that's the trade-off, is sure you can trade the labor of pruning and managing organic material in situ to bring in compost and wood chips, but it's still not the same. It's still not as resilient of a system. You're still missing the strata. You're still missing a whole lot of ecological process. And so I could see that in some of the trees. Nonetheless, a beautiful example of diversity that you can get away with in this part of Portugal. But I did see some areas and I was thinking, ooh, this wants to support species over it. It's getting too much sun. One of the most interesting things that I did see here was it was a dedicated like food forest area where a diversity of fruit trees planted in a relatively close spacing, like way tighter, way closer than you would conventionally ever plant them. And what I was seeing was that because they were planted without regard to what strata each of the trees were, what life cycle, the management of them together, I could see it wasn't working. Some trees were stuck under another tree that wanted to be in a higher strata, but the way they were pruned and managed. And so all that did was really iterate to me is do some thinking about how you're going to plan your system out. Think about the strata, think about the life cycle, think about the spacing. Don't just throw a bunch of really expensive, unless you just like throwing money and seeing how the experiment goes. By all means, do that. But it was just really interesting to see the conflict in the system. You could see the conflict between the trees and the management style. And so it was just really interesting feedback coming from the background of agroforestry, where a lot of people do question, you can't plant those trees so close together. And with the wrong management, you're absolutely right, you can't. But with things managed properly into their correct strata, you can. Super interesting, really valuable to go there, inspiring place to be, despite it not being syntropic. Beautiful to see the impressive diversity happening at the Orchard of Flavors. Yeah, we love a good pecan tree. Nice emergent strata layer would pair very nicely with like a peach or a citrus underneath. I've never seen loquats so big, ever. Never ever in my life. I'm definitely gonna take these seeds. The final place that was really inspiring wasn't so much about the place, but the person. And this is somebody that I've been connected with for at least a couple years online. You might actually know him, is Eduardo.
I was called to basically reorganize the farm a little bit. So we are in a place that presents many challenges because summers are very, very dry. The wind is so strong, as you can see, we're very exposed to the wind here. Here we are in one of the lowest spots of this area actually, so it's this very big and wide valley, so when it does rain a lot this even gets flooded. So we have all of the, which did happen this winter actually, so we have all of the challenges coming together at the same time for the nursery, so that the nursery manager knows which seeds need to go in the nursery before they go out in the fields. So it's the same thing that you just saw but for the nursery. Nice. And then here there is a spreadsheet with all of the seeds that the nursery needs every month. So by the end of the month, the nursery manager is going to be like, do I have enough seeds for next month? It's full everywhere. Look at that. Look, this is how the soil was.
He's a permaculture designer who's in Portugal, and he's doing phenomenal work. He does lots of really great education, and it was just really great to go meet him because we have very similar journeys. We have similar stories. We both started doing this work around the same kind of time period, and we both produced content to engage people in this world.
Sometimes as a designer you overlook the actual needs of people because you're not part of their daily routine. So being here, there has been so many things that I was like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think the team would have this need. So I go home, redesign, rejiggle things, like, okay, let's try this now. Oh, it doesn't work, okay. And it is a lot of that, the difference between holistic design and mainstream design. Mainstream design is I design something, give it to you, you deal with it, deal with the consequences. While for us it's like I design something and then I do want that feedback loop.
That's why we hate master plans.
Yeah.
Living design process or nothing.
Yeah.
No master plans. We sat down, we had some conversations over the course of a couple days. We went to jiu-jitsu together, which was really fun, and just had a good time. It's hard to sometimes find the people that do the same kind of work in this field, but also do the content and the education side of things and have similar philosophies. Right? And every single day, every week, every month, we're going through these either micro or macro disturbances in our own lives, right? These disrupting moments that things feel like chaos. It feels like chaos in a forest when it gets radically pruned, but those are always the opportunities, those are always the moments that create the space, that create the conditions for us to grow back and bounce back even stronger.
I find that in the spiritual world there is so much talk about amazing sounding things, but then they lack the, you know, like for example, we say, okay, we should be in a flow and accept things as they are, but then you're like, it sounds great to say just be in a flow, but what does it mean? Like, what do I do with this information in my daily life? Be in a flow. Sometimes it even used to upset me when people told me, oh, just be in a flow. I would be like, yeah, you step into my life now and be in a flow. You know, it's not easy. Like, what do you actually mean? And then you study about syntropy and you realize that there is a tendency of life. Like most of our ecosystems, if you leave them untouched, they go through a precise series of steps that include chaos and include disturbances and all that, but they go through this precise series of steps to become a forest again. So that if you step out and you observe, there is a mechanism happening everywhere, even in the most destroyed ecosystems. And so to go in the flow in farming means step back and observe what would happen, and then tune into that and facilitate that instead of fighting against it. No, it makes sense. And it's the same thing in our lives, where like sometimes we fight so hard because we need to get somewhere, or we don't want this and we really want that. But what if we step back and again observe and interact? Is the first permaculture principle. Observe and interact. Take a step back, observe patterns. Like, where do you see things coming over and over again in your life?
Moving, they're growing, they're pushing things, they're like accelerating. You being around that energy is like these trees being unpruned but still receiving this energy of like, oh, it's time to go. Like, we're working, cool. Oh, we're working out. Oh, we're training. Oh, we're doing this. We're working. Like, I want to be part of that. It's a small world, so it's really always great to connect with people who are in that space, on the same mission. Big pleasure to meet Eduardo. And just compare and contrast, a lot of what we spoke about was consulting processes, the future that we see for ourselves in this business and this industry, and where we want to take that. And so there's less takeaways here, more just inspiration and insights into the business models that each of us are choosing, education, consultancy, practitioner, and that's something that I can't recommend more enough of. If you are interested in this path of becoming a consultant, spend time around them. See what works well about their business, see what they like, see what the challenges are, what they don't like. Come hang out in the Food Forest Fellowship, talk to us. We help a lot of people on that same path.
Receives so much water when it rains because it all comes down and it's overwhelming. So they had to dig this channel to like get rid of it. So all of this water should have been sinking in the ground, but it's actually on its way to the ocean. If we go to the ocean, we can go together. Actually, you see water just flashing in the ocean and you're like, how are we on our way to desertification when we are wasting all this? You know, it doesn't make sense.
Well, and it's not just water that's going to the ocean, it's sediment, it's nutrients, it's nitrates, phosphate, all the stuff that you know, whatever the land is being put in.
Exactly.
A lot of New Zealand, like 98% of the wetlands, same thing. Drain them, cut channels, get the water out so we can use it for farming. On top of that, all the slopes, the hillsides, the mountains, deforested. Right? And so when you're reducing the ability of the mountains that accumulate the water to soak and hold onto the water, it just runs right down, creates these gullies, landslides, and then flash floods these areas that you've channelized and taken the sponge away. The sponge is the wetland. You've taken that away, and you've taken the sponge away on the mountains. It's like, yeah, no shit, you're having water problems. No shit, all the cities are flooding. We're losing all of our soil into the ocean. All these problems are compounding. The solutions are simple. It's like plant trees. Portugal was just a really valuable place to visit. All these key lessons and takeaways, hopefully you're taking the same inspiration away from this as I have. If you want to see all the details of all the broken down lessons, it's all in the fellowship, but it's such a transformative thing that you can do for yourself is to go to these places. That's why I went to Brazil 2 years ago. That's why I went back last year to Costa Rica, to Florida, to Australia, here in the Mediterranean, to connect with the practitioners, to connect with the practice and see what people are doing. That's how you learn. You go spend time with the black belts. And as much as it's valuable to spend time on your farm, there's something special to be said about going to a new place, putting yourself out of your regular routine and environment and going to learn and compare and contrast. I've been amazed at how similar Portugal and the Mediterranean conditions are to where New Zealand is going. You don't think of New Zealand as a Mediterranean climate, but so much of what I'm seeing here feels like what New Zealand could become in the next 100 years if the conditions don't improve, if we keep mistreating our landscapes. Hopefully you're not in such challenging conditions as here. I don't envy the drought, pest and disease pressure, the challenging conditions, the degraded soil, but it's so impressive. It's so inspiring to see these projects happening on the ground. So thank you for everybody who in Portugal welcomed me in, and hopefully you've enjoyed this and taken some lessons away. You should get some value out of whatever this video is here, and I'll see you in that one. Enjoy.